So I'm not going to acknowledge everybody in the room because I know a lot of you. But I will say hi to the Honorable Bernadette Smith. Thank you for joining us. And my cousin Katie, who is the literal first baby that I ever delivered as a medical student. Yeah, so proud of her. So our lines of sight are a bit funny, so I just want to reassure the people behind Kate, I will make eye contact with you. And the people behind me.
You guys, I got you.
We have this all set out. So Kate, we have known each other since junior high. Andrew Mynarski, to be specific. First question, what do you remember of me from back then?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, Tansé, Bonjour. Thank you all for coming here. Marcie, this is very delightful, and I haven't been in this room for a really long time, so I'm really happy to be here. I remember Andrew Mynarski. Yeah, I was not a good kid. But Marcia, you were the best kid. You had all the awards, you were on all the sports teams, and you were always so kind to little me, who was not a good kid. Did I mention that? I was not a good kid.
Yeah, this is what I remember. Also, consistent, no. But what I admired about you, especially as we moved into Sisler, because we were all about the grunge and the alternative music, and Kate was the absolute best at the outfits, at the dark brooding poetry, Walkman, headphones in all the time.
Yeah. To qualify this, we graduated in 1995, so the grunge was right on point. We were right in there. Yeah, thank you. I never thought I was fat. I was just wearing my dad's old work clothes mostly. I love that I pulled it off.
You pulled it off. But part of our reality was, especially, going home from Sisler, where we walked or we rode the 88 across the literal break, right? And across the tracks into communities where the Sustainable Development Goals were not being met, are not currently being met, probably are not going to be met in our lifetimes, right? And so with that in mind, how do you think about sustainability or sustaining starting?
When I think about it, actually, in context of Sisler was actually the first point where I really noticed this class difference in our realities. I grew up Bannerman and Maine, between Maine and Salter. So, and even Mynarski. I'm gonna re-own that and get that started if it's slacked in recent years. We were all kind of from the same kind of working class. And I remember in Sisler being confronted with all these kids who, from Meadows West and Garden Grove, and at the time they just felt rich to me. They had rec rooms with deep freezes full of food. I love that. And so it was the first kind of confrontation I had with this idea of lack. And I feel like growing up, I never noticed that before. I felt like we were all kind of on the same page, and we all just adapted to our reality, and we took care of each other. And it was just a really fun place to grow up, honestly. And yeah, I don't know if I answered that question already at all. Bad start. I'm not going to answer the questions. Just so
We'll see. But let's pick up on that a little bit, because similarly, that was also when I started to notice the differences, right? Mm-hmm. We thought the people with the basement snacks were wealthy.
Yes.
Right? The people who rode the 16 instead of the 88
yes.
came from the nicer neighborhoods than us. How did that start to form your thinking around things like gaps, inequalities, and your understanding of yourself?
I like that question. I really just felt, again, aforementioned, I wasn't a good kid. I was actually a really shy kid. I was actually a really disempowered kid. I remember a friend of mine, Joanne Arnott, always said, "You're not shy, you're oppressed." I was an incredibly oppressed child. I didn't feel that my voice had any difference anywhere. And when I started writing poetry, I immediately wanted to write about this place that I come from. Not only like my family or my community, but like myself. And really try to like articulate what that experience was. Because I didn't feel like I came from lack. I didn't feel like what we had was any less than other people, besides, all their Costco food, which was really impressive at the time. But it was really this idea of defending. I felt like we were defending where we came from all the time. We were like, I felt like we were in this position where we had to say, oh, it's not that bad all the time. And I guess I wanted to show that. And yeah, honestly, I never made that connection before. That's where I kind of started what I do.
Mm-hmm. And so you were definitely writing poetry by high school.
Yes, there was also a lot of pot involved.
I wasn't going to bring it up.
At the time, I'm an adult now.
Mm-hmm. How did that writing help you start to reconcile the differences in the stories about who we were and where we came from and who you knew yourself and our communities to be?
It really started as this way, and I always said like writing as a young person was definitely something that saved my life, because I didn't always have safe spaces to share my stories and my story, just like my personal experience with the world. But I always had journals. And in Sisler High School, I had great teachers. April Darnley, hello. A creative writing space where I just learned how to write and kind of get that out. And that was where I did start to articulate that experience. And I did very much, though I didn't know it at the time, I was really utilizing that age-old storytelling poetry tool where the universal is contained within the personal. The universal is contained within the specific. And by telling my story, I was sharing the stories of other people as well. And I was really talking about that idea of self and that idea of how I can survive this and how through that other people can survive that.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about that, the universal being contained within the specific, part of what that makes me think about are, some of the teachings that we carry around connections between the self, the family, the community, the nation, and the land itself. Does that align with how you see that universal and specific as well?
I think it's grown into that for sure. I mean, for many, many years, it was really just keeping my head above water. But as I grew into stories and writing stories for publication, it was really this way of reaching out and informing community and forming family, and through story, and really creating these places where, if not me, then characters could survive and thrive into different things. I think through that it was, really just this point of thriving more than just surviving.
When you released The Circle, or maybe I was reading the advanced manuscript, one of the things that stuck out to me, I think I texted you about it, was the epigraph, the poem Blind Justice by Lee Maracle. I don't know if you brought that. I think you have a copy.
Is it here?
There. So while you look for that, what struck me about that epigraph was the opening line and the closing line of that poem, which says, "Still, I am not tragic." And it ends with, "I refuse to be tragic." And I'm just thinking about what you had said around stories of being able to survive and thrive. So can you tell us a little bit about why you chose that particular poem for the epigraph?
Well, first of all, this book came out I was finishing this shortly after the passing of Lee Maracle, who was a great mentor and teacher and friend of mine. So I did want to honor her. I did want to bring her into this because she was very important in these 3 books, and how it and what I was trying to do with them. You know, the work of Lee Maracle, the work of everyone who came before us, and Lee was always had this beautiful way of tying in what appears on the surface as gruesome. But if you look at it, you actually see this humanity and this beauty. And that, I feel, is what I'm always trying to do. And trying to get to the wholeness of the story and the actual true story, which is that as much as it seems like something hard, and sometimes it is something very hard, what comes of that is this incredible strength that comes through. And that's the story I wanted to tell. I do often feel like I stay too long in, what's the word? They always call it gritty. Everyone always says, oh, your work is so gritty. And I'm like, I'm a really very clean person, so I'm a little insulted by that. But I don't always see that, because what I'm seeing is I'm seeing these beautiful people who are immersed in situations that are completely not of their own design. And they're doing absolutely amazing things in the world that they were given. So that's what I see. And that's what Lee taught me. So this is a beautiful poem, and it's appeared in a couple of her books, most recently in a beautiful book called Hope Matters that she wrote with her 2 daughters. And it's just these beautiful interplay of poems that I think it was her last book that she published. So I'll read it. Because, I got my glasses on, so I'm ready to read. You found the page. I found the page, and I love bringing her words into this. Still I am not tragic, not even in my addicted moments, a needle hanging from the vein of my creased arm. I was not tragic. Even as I jump from a boat in vain attempt to join my ancestors, I am not tragic. Even in my disconnection from song, from dance, I am not tragic. Even in seeing you as privileged, as an occupier of my homeland in my homeless state, even as men abduct us as we hitchhike along these new highways to disappear along this long colonial road, I refuse to be tragic. I love that. Thank you. Lee.
It is... Not too long ago, I was at a leadership event where there was a pretty big distinction between a younger group of mostly BIPOC and queer leaders and a more senior group of white leaders. And we had done this community visit, and we were sitting around after and debriefing, and me and my good friend Mel had immersed ourselves in the community and spent time, and the rest did not. And then we were sitting around, and this guy was talking about how what he heard of the story of one of the community members we did meet with was a story of overcoming and triumph. And I had said, oh, that's interesting, because I heard the story of a 12-day occupation where they fought for their land and a 6-year battle to get washrooms in their park, And he looked at me and he said, but so often the disadvantaged can only focus on the disadvantage. And what that makes me think about, a lot of things, but also is sometimes when we put our stories out there, the reader takes their own lens to it. And I'm just wondering, how you balance the story you tell in your voice of the surviving, the thriving, the owning of the story with a lens a reader might bring to it.
I personally, I don't think I do, because I feel like when you put a story out there, when you put anything out there, you do all the work and frame the story, and I spend a lot of time on the back copy of the story and how I'm going to sell the story, and I talk with marketing people who are like, you should sell this, and I'm like, I'm not going to sell it like that, I'm going to sell it like this. So you frame it, but then you put it out in the world, and you don't you don't know. I said I wasn't gonna. I said I was gonna swear a lot. Everyone okay? You don't fucking know. You have you have absolutely no control of what happens when it goes out into the world, and people are gonna take whatever they can take. I was convinced whenever any of my books come out, I'm convinced that I'm gonna be like run out of town with pitchforks and torches and just like, you know, burned at the stake or whatever, because I'm so afraid of what I'm trying to do being misinterpreted. And it's always going to be misinterpreted. Everything we do is always going to be misinterpreted, because we only ever see the world through our eyes, and anyone else is only going to see our stuff through their eyes. And and my favorite story about this is one time when the break was out, I was doing some event and I was walking down a hall, and this lady came up to me and she's like, oh, she was an older white lady, probably a retired school teacher. They always like to talk to me. No, and they correct my typos. They tell me like, oh, on page 432, you had this typo. And I'm like, thank you for your service. But she said, oh, your story was so hard. And I'm so glad you didn't bring culture and race into it. I'm so glad you made it not about that. And I'm like, bitch, that was the only thing I did. But then I kept walking down the hall, and she very well intended, no shame. Thank you, retired school teachers. And then I walked down that same damn hallway, and then a Nietzsche woman came up to me, and she's like, I'm so glad you brought culture into this. I'm so glad you brought up these racial elements into this story. And I'm like, that's what it is. That's what it is. Everyone always sees things through their lens. So yeah, when The Strangers came out, the first chapter of The Strangers, like it or lump it, I chose a very harsh voice who drops a lot of F-bombs. And the first chapter is Phoenix birthing, well incarcerated by herself. She's a child. She's 16 years old. And I got, I think it's called Docs. I'm sorry, I'm like the most old person when it comes to the internet, but I got all these emails through my website. Like, I guess it was some sort of church group that decided to send me all these like emails and basically say like, you know, you swear too much, you're disgusting, you shouldn't write anymore. Like, it was all the same letter, like, you know, probably about, 10 in my inbox every day. And it was frightening to me because I'm not on the internet, I'm not on social media, so I have no thick skin for this. And I took that and I was really shameful about that. I was like, oh, I shouldn't swear. I did this wrong. I'm always like thinking I did something wrong. When meanwhile, the chapter is this lonely girl birthing by herself in handcuffs, because that's what happens, with the only support a person who is a guard who she does not trust. And then her baby is apprehended at birth. And they weren't talking about that. They weren't talking about the millions of different things that were happening in that chapter. They were talking about the F-bombs. That was their lens. That was something that they felt was very important to them to, stand up for. And that is not my battle. I don't care. I think the word fuck should be out there, and we shouldn't be bothered by it. And I don't think that should have been the takeaway. And I'm really saddened that was the takeaway.
Well, and I think, sometimes that is how power and white supremacy operate, because perhaps in their view, or in that person's view, the justice system and the child welfare system were doing what they were meant to do, right? I think people in this room, ourselves, would recognize the threat to sustainability very clearly, that has been and continues to be for our relatives. I think, I read The Break. I was still working in public health in the WRHA at the time. We actually did some book clubs and had some discussions around that. Yeah, surprise. In part because the segue I'm making here is from systemic racism,
I-
like justice, child welfare to the healthcare system. So in case anyone wasn't following me.
I love that you're keeping us on topic, and I'm doing whatever I can to keep us off topic.
We're soft launching my Oprah career. Full disclosure.
I'm gonna cry at some point.
Yeah.
For sure.
But the portrayal of the healthcare system in the break, I think for anyone who has worked in the healthcare system, encountered the healthcare system, is actually incredibly accurate. And you're laughing.
Because I'm like, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I did that right.
This was actually before we were in a lot of close contact, so I didn't help with that. Just FYI.
No, it's true.
Yeah. But I just wondered, like, how much of your personal experience goes into those kind of descriptions?
And I'm laughing, like, I always love it when I get things right, because honestly, my research, for a lot of stuff is really weird Google searches. And, but that was personally in the break, more than any other book, it was really just living. It was really just having, and what I wanted to do, I had no intention of making an accurate whatever of the healthcare system, and I'm really glad I got there, so thank you. It was really about my experiences of being in hospital spaces with family. And I loved those, and there's a brilliant thing that happens when family is together in something, and when tragedy happens, and I always call it like the go vibe is set. You get the go vibe goes on, and everyone is taking care of each other. And the break is all about everybody having their go button turned on, and everyone's immediately in that trauma taking care of one another. And so what they're doing is they're taking this hospital room and they're making it their home. And they're staying in that home, and they kept bringing coffee and tea in the break. I don't know, there's many, many instances of tea. We actually counted it at one point. I think there's 13 incidents of people constantly bringing hot beverages, and because it's winter and that's what we do. But it was really just about, making that home place. And I don't know, I've had such heartwarming, tragic, grief-stricken, horrific experiences in hospitals, but also these places of profound laughter and connection, and being together and taking care of one another. And that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, and I see that there is this tension here, even when we're talking about things like the Sustainable Development Goals, where the idea is systems are meant to be supporting the sustainability of our communities, our well-being, our cultural identities, but it is the rallying of the family and the extended kinship network that centers the survival of themselves, kind of despite the forces of the system.
Yeah. And I find that so, and that's what we were talking about as we were reading these sustainability goals, because my first reaction is, I don't see any of these in our communities. I don't see any of these attainable in our communities in any time. I do see so often, too often, that these systems are made in place not for us. They're for other people. They're set in place to surveil us. In order for us to either behave like the other people, mainstream people, or to, just go away, which was probably what we were supposed to do in the first place. And that's a depressing segue. Also go back to this idea of when I was asked to do this, and the idea of sustainability, my first question was how do I fit into this? How does anything I do have to do with global sustainability? And we really started talking about this idea of cultural sustainability, these goals, how are these goals sustained? And I don't necessarily know how I play a role in that, because I feel like what I do is quite superfluous in a lot of ways. But it's that idea of self-sustainability and taking care of the self. and really taking care of the self and creating this strong person to be of service to the world. And that's where I connect with it, because that's what I always try to do.
Well, and I think your earlier story about the Indigenous woman who said, thank you for putting the culture into this, right? And coming back to the idea of storytelling as being like a really critical role that the ways are in how our cultures and our very selves have been sustained over generations and generations of genocide. We did talk quite a lot about that idea of sustaining despite, sustaining the self, and the interplay of the sustaining and the healing of the self and the families and communities that we're part of. And I had mentioned at brunch the other day how much that made me think about the Audre Lorde quote that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And you were very kind and sent me some of your new writing and your new work. And I was hoping you would consent to read the one, My Body is a Sovereign Nation, as people think about this idea of sustaining the self and those interplays.
All right. Excellent segue.
Yeah.
Excellent segue, Niti Oprah. Yeah. You're really on there. I conveniently have it right here. So this is, I always like to bring poetry into it because I feel like, and I'm glad we started with Lee. So this is a new poem, and I've never read it out loud before. So yeah, here we go. Let's see. My body is a sovereign nation. My body is a sovereign nation. It is my first land of belonging and my last circle of kinship, my homeland, my home place. And I am, and all I am made of, all I have to give, housed here as long as this life lasts. My body is a sovereign nation, sacred space of spirit, light, and as under siege as my mother, earth, as unprotected, neglected, abused, surviving. Like her, I can be destroyed. Like her, I am not. Yet, and nothing you can ever do will negate my sacredness, the purity of my spirit, the divinity of this space. This is true of all of us. This light spirit essence will never be dulled, quelled, lessened, no matter how scarred we are divine. My body is a sovereign nation, the place no one can tell me no. Here I am more than chief and council, president or prime minister. Here I sit in assembly with my ancestors and descendants. We convene in lodge, come to consensus. No one else is consulted. My body is a sovereign nation, lucky to be on my home territory, but wherever else I go, I am a visitor and will act accordingly. But wherever else I go, I am in here, so still, home. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's always easier to write the edited versions of my words than.
Now, as you are reading, and I'm sitting here, I'm looking at you, you're wearing a shirt with a trans flag on it. We know the attacks on, gender affirming care, trans rights, women's rights. There are a lot of threats, actually, to our sovereignty. Do you want to maybe just talk a bit about that reality and how maybe something around bodily sovereignty and sustainability?
Just bringing it back to that sustainability.
You're welcome, MCIC.
Just coming back. I don't know how to answer that question. I'll answer that question in the way that right now I am incredibly obsessed with this idea of self-care. I feel like I've gone through the last few years kind of coming into, I just passed my 47th birthday. So I'm fully into auntie era. I'm coming into like maybe a granny era, not an actual granny era. My kids are not allowed to have kids. But just coming into this place and realizing how much shit I have not gotten together. I always joked about how I got a lot of therapy through my 20s and I knew all my problems. But I never even assumed that there was a way to heal them, So just really taking that time to figure out how to heal, how to self-care, how to the therapists always call it tend into that inner child, I've mama bared, I have 4 kids, so I've mama bared in my life. So really mama bearing myself, which is something I never considered, because as long as I've been going out into the world, caring for my kids, I used to be a teacher, I was caring for other kids, I was doing this stuff, I was teaching, I was always all over, looking after everyone else. And it always felt like this selfish thing to look after yourself. It always felt like rest in a world where there's so much to fucking do is irresponsible. But it is the point of revolution. The only reason we're doing all of this is for us to attain joy, for our kids to live in peace and safety, for ourselves to live in peace and safety. So really now I'm kind of getting into this place of making my home. I recently passed my doorway, first doorway last year, and one of the first songs you learn is about now I walk into my midday home. So this last year has been creating this midday home for myself, and this sacred lodge where I live, where my peace and security and my safety is non-negotiable, and everything else has to be out. And it's such a beautiful place to be now. And this is where, and how just taking that time for myself actually makes me better out there in the world. It makes you don't do it just to be of service to the world, but you can do so much more in the world if you come from a place of strength. It's profound for me right now, because it's totally new. Yeah.
And I guess what I think of as you're saying that, and we're talking about self-care and self-love and service, is how when we come from places where we're in bodies in which we are consistently dehumanized, a lot of the messages are dehumanizing, that part of that self-care project is actually rehumanizing ourselves in our own eyes first, right? Does that link to the messages in your My Body is a Sovereign Nation work?
I think when I was writing that, I was really thinking in terms of how this is sacred too, And as much as I've talked about the specifics to the universal, I've been saying that for however long I've been doing this, but I haven't really honored myself. Because, and through that honored what I'm doing, because I've always downplayed everything. I've been extraordinarily lucky in what I get to do, but I haven't taken really the time to enjoy those honors, because, and we've talked about this several times, it's you don't, you can see so many other people who do not have as much as you do. So you don't want to celebrate what you have, because you want to go out and share it, or you want to go out and downplay it, or, but just taking that time, because I haven't been able to do that for myself until I started thinking of myself as, I would my kids, or I would another community member. I would never want anyone to downplay their successes. I would never want anyone else to not celebrate themselves and the tiny little successes we have every day. Just those tiny little pieces of self-care, those times we're not actually hating on ourselves for a minute. Yay, that's a fucking trophy right there. So why do I keep doing it to myself?
Yeah, it's like a restoring too, right? Yeah. Where the self actually is also fully human, gets to rest, gets to have joy, and gets to celebrate. And this makes me think about this other bell hooks quote we talked about a little bit, which says, "Verily, if ever are any of us healed in isolation, healing is an act of communion." And so I'm wondering how you see your own healing work as well as your storytelling work as being part of that communal experience of healing.
I love that quote. I love the idea of communion, and then bringing in like not only community but communion, and like let's retake that word communion from the Catholics, and like just really talk about how it's just this sacred joining that we have with whatever spirit, community, whatever. It's a good word. I used to always think this work I did was healing. I used to think that somehow I was doing catharsis and I was getting it all out and I was putting my story out there. And then I actually released a book and realized I had to, in order to do this, I have to keep re-traumatizing myself, basically, because I keep having to talk about stuff. And I very slowly learned how to put up guards and boundaries around what I wanted to talk about and what I was willing to share. And how I can write something like the break in the novels, which are heavy things, but also still protect myself and also still protect the reader. Like I feel like I'm always working towards that place of healing. I don't ever want to just tell the gritty story. My story is supposed to lead you to the lightness. I remember a traditional storyteller friend of mine always taught me a long time ago that our job is never to lead people into the dark. We might have to go through the dark places, but our job is to show them the light and show them all the way out. So that's what I'm always trying to do. But I don't think of my work as healing anymore. I'm not actually healing myself. You know, you learn, you write a heavy book, you put it out into the world and you realize, to your surprise, oh, I am not healed. Oh, wait, there is still a bunch of crap going on in my head, in my body. That's not what self-care is. Like art is for sharing. It is for conversation. It is for communication with one another. That is healing, but it's not all the healing. You know, my self-care journey, if I were on Instagram, that's what we call it, my self-care journey, is really been about realizing what I need to do for myself and only for myself. And usually as an introverted person, that doesn't mean communicating and that doesn't mean having a conversation. It really just means, you know, a lot of quiet and a lot of peace. And honestly, I think the most important thing I've ever done for myself with self-care is given myself a voice in my head that's actually my friend. And not just the inner critic, and not just the person who's always like looking for all the sides and how, you know, we have those people and they drive us to do all these things we have to do in the world, right? But we actually need a friend in there. You know, we need like an anti-voice that's telling us like, you got this and it's all good. And you know what, that thing you did, you made an ass out of yourself, but you did good. You know, that's what I have now.
You know, and part of what I hear you saying is like, it's not about the healing anymore, right? I mean, it kind of is, but a lot of it is around the self-care, the kindness in the head voice instead of the critic. And I'm just wondering, I'm going somewhere with this, trust me.
You are? I trust you implicitly.
Because we've talked about this too. Part of the reality of life and lives when you come from communities impacted by so many different forces of oppression is the insults do keep coming. And that does impact our ability to like cross a finish line. Oh, now I have healed. I am healed.
I've arrived. I've healed.
Yeah.
Here I glow. Yeah.
And that's certainly a theme in the books, right? Like the characters, things keep happening and they keep carrying on. And so I just wondered how that relates to this idea of sustainability or sustaining the self and self-care.
You're getting top marks for, keep bringing it back to that sustainability. Let's count how many times sustainability was written. All those times.
I don't think the interviewee is supposed to mock the interviewer. But I do think that idea of carrying through and carrying on
Yeah.
is a common theme that you write about.
Well, it's that idea of healing being the ongoing process, because we are always hit with so many things. And that was something that I remember in my childhood really just being confronted with that idea. Like, it's never one thing. We don't have like this one trauma story and then we go on about our lives skipping. We have so many trauma fucking stories. And whenever we think we've gotten through one thing, another fucking thing happens. And it's always like, it's this ongoing process. And it's not about, like, I always thought I would one day become, healed, and, go, be like the Buddha and, just hang out and be all healed and shit. But it's never like that. It's like this ongoing checking yourself, and it's really, and checking on each other, and really coming to these points of rest, however brief, however, minute, however immersed in all the chaos, because it's all still going around, but just these like points of tiny little points of peace, and that's healing, and that's a success, and that's just as important, because the Buddha on the mountain isn't sitting there all healed and whatever, and if they are there, it's only because they're on a freaking mountain, and away from everything, but actually
people
and actually away from the people, but even still, like, there's probably still a bunch of, even when we're all by ourselves and nothing is happening, we go, whenever we go on the vacation, I recently finally took myself on vacation. First time ever I went on vacation. And it was the worst freaking experience in my life. See, I don't have to swear all the time. Because I was just sitting there on the beach with all my stuff. And it was just like, formulating, and, oh, look at the beautiful ocean, I'm going to take some pictures. And then all my stuff just kept coming up, because it always finds you. But, but the moments of rest in there, the tiny little pieces that you can take, that's the healing. That's the goal, I think.
Yeah.
For now.
And maybe not accepting the discourses that say we have to be stuck in the trauma stories and the hard parts, right?
I don't think we are. And I think this is where, when I think about like Indigenous ways of being, and I know that was in some of our notes, which I don't feel in any way able to respond to. But when I think of my community and my family and my Indigenous ways of being, it's all of that stuff. It's being in the hospital room and having someone tell the funniest fucking story and laughing your ass off, and then getting a bunch of tea and, hugging and holding each other and singing songs, and, that, like, and all of those things are happening. The grief is happening, the trauma is happening, the systematic surveillance is happening, but so is the joy, and so is the kinship. That's like, it's all there, all at the same time.
Yeah. There's an element in that around like sharing and sustaining our own humanity first, right?
Yeah.
And I suppose when I read the goals, one of the things that I reflect on is how some of our relationships to the different elements of them are different, right? And so, for example, there is a Sustainable Development Goal, number 6, around clean water and sanitation. But our relationship to water, whether that's as water carriers, people who understand how critical water is to life, is really a lot kind of deeper than just clean water and sanitation. As it happens, you wrote a whole poetry book about water.
That's an excellent segue.
Yeah, thank you.
Sustainability and segues. She's got it all. She's got it all.
But I did want us to bridge into talking about the water some.
And I do have a poem that we were talking about that
Yes.
I'd be lovely. I would be happy to share. But I love the idea of water, and I've talked about it actually in the book of poetry. I did a documentary. I kind of play with water in a whole bunch of different ways, because it's not just one thing. It's not just, when we talk about clean, and the sustainability goals really talks about an environmental idea of like clean drinking water, which is, essential to human life, and all of us. And it is also something that is imminently under threat. But the idea of water, it's not just that. We have, in our country, I think, we have very few protected water spaces anymore. We used to have many, but Harper got rid of a whole bunch of them, right? So our water is actually under threat. The water that we drink, the water that we survive, along with our land, is under threat, under constant threat. And then there's also these complicated ideas around water, because water is actually, we are all water carriers. We hold water. This is something sacred to our ceremonies and sacred to our beings. We have a very spiritual relationship with water. But then we also have a complicated relationship with water. Part of the book that was my specific relationship with the Red River. So the Red River is the reason we're all here. It's this, this land, this river highway that is why we actually landed in this place of flooding, which is actually kind of the worst place to settle. But, that's where we settled here in Winnipeg. But it's also been a place of incredible grief throughout our histories, not only as a place of passing because of tragedy, because it's actually a very hard river to cross. So many people have passed that way. It's also been a place of hiding. People have been disposed there. And in the work of the poetry, it was a place of searching. So I was very lucky to do a project highlighting the work of Drag the Red, which is literally this place of searching along the river, along with being this incredible space and source of our life here. And for my people, the Michif people, it was very important. It's right there in the name, and it's also this beautiful place. We're actually really fortunate to have so much untapped riverside in this city. And if you go to other cities, it's not the same. Like we have actually, it looks like it has always looked in many places. And we're very fortunate to have that, along with all of these other things. So it's an incredible, it's not just one thing. It's not just one small item of water. Water is contains everything, I think.
Yeah, and I think that, part of the question that some of our friends at MCIC came up with was around understanding that SDGs is necessary for the good life, or health, as we might call it in different translations. But how far that goes beyond, absolutely clean water and sanitation, core to it, but for us to sustain and our cultural well-being relies on sustaining that relationality to the water as well. So I notice you're not reaching for the book yet, but perhaps you want to.
I'm sorry. I got ranting. I forgot to read the poem.
Yeah. Maybe you want to read the River Woman.
The River Woman
piece.
Poem? Okay.
Yeah. This was also a passage that I texted Kate after I read it. It is probably, of all of the written words that you've put, my favorite passage.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. I love that this is your favorite passage. This is also a repetitive poem, just like My Body is a Sovereign Nation. I don't just write repetitive poems, but I'll read it anyway. River Woman. This river is a woman. She is bright and she is beautiful. She once carried every nation here, but she is one of those women, too soon forgotten and broken like a body that begs without words, only rough hands that reach out, palms up. This river is a woman, and she has been dragged and dragged. Metal coils catch her tangled hair, and everyone wants to know her secrets. But she keeps them. She won't let them go unless she trusts you, unless you ask real nice, unless she feels like it. This river is a woman, and she is full of good intentions, bad regrets, and sometimes she just folds into herself, can slow to a slush, then rush into race, currents indiscernible, patterns intangible, and below she goes even faster. This river is a woman, forever returning, twisting north, a snake carved into prairie grass, hiding everywhere. eroded with age, etched into her edges and newly born every day. This river is your lover. She curls around you, pulses and fills you like heartbeat. And if you are very quiet, all you hear is her. This river is your mother. She flows on and unnoticed, slips in and slides out, as if she was never here, as if she was always here. This river is my sister. She is bright and beautiful and brown, sings soft every summer, holds us up all winter, and every spring she swells, reminds us we are just visitors here. This is her country. She is that woman. Her deft voice reaches out, broken by everything that has been thrown into her, but somehow her spirit rages on. Somehow a song like her never fades.
As you read, I am struck again about how the relationality goes both ways. And also about how the river also, like the body is a sovereign nation, the river also has its sovereignty.
Yeah, it is his own beast for sure.
We have about 15 minutes to respond to some of the questions from the audience. There is one here I'm going to start with that might be a bit controversial or a bit intense, but I thought we'll just go right at it.
Get at it.
All right. So the question is, are you able to put your finger on why it is that where the words sustainable development goals are uttered here, there is a feeling of mockery around them, of them being just words? What are we missing?
I want you to help me with these questions, just so you know. These sound like, A+, these are the Keener student questions for sure. I make fun of everything, and I make fun of everything respectfully. So when I make fun of the idea of sustainability and stuff like that, I don't mean to mock them for sure. I do think that they're beautiful goals, but they seem so unachievable. They seem very pie in the sky. And I guess I always come back to this idea of like, okay, how? What are the tangibles? What are the, steps of getting there? And in that way, it seems almost less attainable because it's so far away.
Yeah, I would just add, I remember, for example, when there were child health goals and the conservative government sent a ton of new money overseas for global women's health, which is of course important, but there were not new investments in Indigenous women's health or Indigenous child's health. And so it felt like a lot more of the work was done around our community and collective care and self-sustaining than others supporting these goals. Yeah. So that maybe is part of it for me.
Yeah, but I also think that when you make, for me, it feels like when you make something smaller and attainable, it is attainable. When you talk about communities taking care of one another and taking care of each other and developing like a project that might seem very small potatoes in the grand scheme of things, but that's what care is, and that's what makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, and I also think our communities have, in fact, sustained ourselves, right? Often despite forever, time immemorial. And also, we are actively practicing today the future we want our descendants to have, right? The generations to come. And that is, to me, some of the attainable pieces and the sovereignty piece.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. This one is definitely for you. It has your name on it.
Okay.
Katherena.
That's me.
In the circle, the chapter about Ben the therapist is structured differently. Oh. Could you please tell us about your decision to create such space? Was the question coming over from the...
We found the questioner.
Just kidding. They just really like the question.
Yeah, it's a good question because, well, in my novel, I'm a poet. I think first and foremost and last, and in poetry you get to like play. You know, you play with uppercase, lowercase. You play with line break. You play with like the page a little bit. And in my first two novels, I didn't deviate from this is a novel and we are writing in prose and here's a paragraph and here's what dialogue looks like. And publishers really like you to. They literally have a style guide and they're like, if you don't do it, they'll like make it. So in the circle, I've finally was brave enough to break away from that a little bit. So in the circle, it's totally different in that every chapter is a different character and I did whatever the hell I wanted in that way. So Ben is a very different voice and he just, I feel like in playing with how different voices look on the page, different voices might look different on the page. So Ben and Kyle is all in poetry, very sparse poetry, lots of space on the page. And Ben is kind of, he's not only a counselor, he's an elder. And so elders are really good at talking and storytelling. And I feel like Ben in his voice would be like, I am talking. You know how elders talk and they're like, I am talking and everyone is listening to me. You know, that's why it would look like that. That's what it looked like. That's what it was.
Well, and I just think it's so interesting listening to you say that and your own bravery, but also vulnerability in it, and how it was another stage of owning your own voice that then creates the space for these other voices to show up in different forms.
Oh, hopefully. I mean, that's the whole idea, you know, but.
So switching gears again here, I see these two questions as kind of related, but I'm going to give them to you one at a time. If you were the teenage version of you today, what would you want you to know?
Oh, I love this question. I'm gonna throw it back to you. The teenage version of me. This was actually, full disclosure, this was a question in therapy the other day, so I have a prepared answer.
Is your therapist here?
Is she here? She's not allowed to come to my events.
Yeah.
Like, you know too much. Stay away. But no, it was this idea, like, I think any younger version of me would just be so fucking proud of me. Like, just amazed. Like, I just love that I get to do this. I love that I'm at this point of my life. I love this beautiful thing that happens as you get older and you give less and less fucks. It's very exciting. I love that. And I think that I would just, be such a good auntie. I would have loved to know someone like me when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I didn't know this was possible. I didn't know this was, even remotely in the cards. It was always just this pipe dream that we all fantasize and have pipe dreams. So I just think, I would have saved myself a hell of a lot of grief if I believed that it could actually happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think?
Okay, so full disclosure for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm like a very high achieving perfectionist.
Really?
So what I would have told myself is like, give yourself a damn break sometimes. Yeah, that would have been a useful lesson to learn a lot younger.
Yeah, self-care, man.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the one that I said was related because I suspect whoever wrote this maybe needs some of that. What if you didn't get support by people who were supposed to help you with your situations in your life? To turn a blind eye, to ignore what you're going through, no matter how much you cry out for help. Nobody isn't going to stop, but only look at you. To judge and tell you you're not going anywhere in life, and then walk away from you, helpless, worthless, to gain insanity and self-hatred, knowing the world is against you.
Well, whoever wrote that, I'm sorry that that's your experience. I can also say whoever wrote that, I feel that. And I feel that as my experience. I not exactly. Of course, we all have our individual experiences, but I did have many people who didn't believe in me. I did have many people think that what I was going to achieve is not what I achieved. I did have many people try to tell me, in the strangers, Cedar goes to a guidance counselor and basically is talking about like managing her expectations, away from university and going to some sort of a trade. I had that conversation with many professionals. I'm not going to call anybody out, but it happened. And also that idea of the people that are supposed to care for you, not actually caring for you. What helped me is the people that did, sometimes in really minute ways. I mentioned my creative writing teacher earlier. I had teachers along the way, not all the time, but those ones that did, I held on to those. I remember reading something about how, studies show kids make it if they have one person to depend on. And that's really sad to me that it was one person out of all the thousands of people who are supposed to support you as a child. But it's true, it's that one person. And sometimes it's only like one person at a time, but it's almost like grabbing as you get through. And honestly, it's also yourself. Sometimes as a kid, you have to be your own parent. Sometimes as a kid, you have to be your own caregiver, and that's incredibly hard. But you can say that if no one believes you, then you believe it. And you pull yourself as far as you can go until you get to that next person who gives you something.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we could just ask, because it does sound like someone is really struggling here tonight. A lot of people in this room might be willing to see that person, to remind them that they're valuable, maybe to listen. Maybe that would be the one thing today that reminds people who are struggling like that they are a valuable human deserving of love and a beautiful future. So I'm just going to ask if you were in the room and you would be willing to be that person for someone tonight, that someone could come up to you and say, hey, could we chat for 5 minutes? And you could tell them that they are loved as a human. Could you just put your hand up for a minute? And then if someone needs that, afterwards, maybe you can reach out. Okay, lots of hands raised here.
Lots of aunties in the room.
Lots of
uncles.
Aunties, uncles,
And cousins,
relatives.
Yeah.
Okay. So, can you tell us how you named characters in your book, especially Phoenix?
Characters have I'm obsessed with names. I'll start there. Phoenix was one of those characters that, characters come in different ways. Sometimes you form them, sometimes they're already formed. Phoenix was already formed. And I don't know why her name is Phoenix. Something around the idea of rising from the ashes, sure. But also because she was named by a young person, Elsie, who had her when she was very young, and Phoenix was a name I liked when I was a kid, kind of thing. Like, that's kind of where names come from. My names always kind of mean something, but they're also just names that I like. And sometimes they play off each other in different ways, like Lou and Tommy kind of have different meanings of why I chose that name, like Paulina and it's a whole thing, and it doesn't matter. Like it's fun to me, but it's not necessarily important. But Phoenix felt like she needed that strong name, But because she was such a strong, very complicated, very much character. So yeah, she just was always Phoenix. Yeah.
And it's interesting, right? Because as a reader, certainly that name made me expect her to overcome
Yes.
and rise from the ashes.
Yes.
Yeah, whether intentional or...
yeah, you want, the whole point, like we meet Phoenix at this point of absolute bottom, for lack of a better word, in her life. And so there is a certain rising that kind of happens with her, inevitably.
Yeah, and to believe even here, hope can exist.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, It's also just a really cool ass name.
It's a cool name.
Cool name. It's a nice name.
Okay, last question here. Any chance for a fourth book?
Oh, fuck no.
There's no waffling there.
No, I was like, I wrote the one, and that was hard enough. And then I know, like, it was always this larger story, and it was always contained in the three. And the arc that happens over the 3 books is what originally I tried to do in one book, and it didn't happen. So I did what I wanted with this particular narrative around forgiveness and overcoming, and whether or not we can do that. I do love, I'm kind of low-key obsessed with like the interconnected work, like of Louise Erdrich does this, Richard Van Camp does this. So my next book is like the cousins of Phoenix and Cedar. So they're interconnected genealogically. And they're also strangers. But it's a completely different story.
Storyline.
Yeah, it's a completely different story. So I like that. I want to kind of connect, and I have other kind of stories mapped out that like kind of connects and stuff. But there was, for these particular characters, most of them, 99.9% of them, I mean, never say never, but no.
But they're put to rest right now. Okay, well, thank you for submitting your questions, everybody.
Thank you for those.
And to Kate for answering them.